And my name is Micah McLean, and I'm the creator of the Micah McLean Talks YouTube channel. Before I go on, please remember to like, share, subscribe, and comment on all of the content on this channel. And please do remember to subscribe also, because this will enable me to continue to bring you thought-provoking, relevant, inspirational, and just interviews that you just enjoy to watch. So much for coming onto the platform, Stephen. You are the MP for East Ham. You've served in a variety of different positions in the front bench, including Chief Secretary to the Treasury under Tony Blair. So thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
First question I'd like to ask you is, please tell us about your early life growing up, but particularly why you decided to become an MP.
Well, I grew up with my family, mum, dad, younger brother and sister, mainly in Hampshire, in Fleet, although I was born in Oldham in Lancashire. I went off to university. While I was at university, I spent a couple of weeks one summer helping out on a church project in East End of London, which I really enjoyed. And so when I left university, I got a job in London with a computer company. I needed somewhere to live. The only place I knew anything about really was where we'd been on that mission. So I went and rented a room in the house of one of the people who'd been on that. And I joined the Labour Party. And that was kind of how it all really began. And, you know, I'm now the MP for that area. I find it a really interesting area. I enjoy living here, but there's lots of things that need to be changed. And that was always clear. There were lots of things that need to be changed. So I think that was the motivation for wanting to get involved in the politics and to become the Member of Parliament.
Thank you so much for the answer. Following on from that question, you've been an MP in Parliament for about 27 years. What are the greatest challenges you face in terms of balancing your Christian convictions with the ambitions of your political party?
I think if you want to be involved in changing things, you have to work with others. You need to be part of a movement that's committed to the same kind of changes. And that's what a political party is. And so I've got no difficulty at all in working alongside with my colleagues in the Labour Party. Some are very good friends, some I barely know. But we do share some ambitions for how we think the communities we represent should be and the way that the government should behave. Sometimes there are things that some people in the party say or aim for that I don't agree with, and we talk about those. But I remain a very committed member of my party. It's been very supportive to me, as you say, for a long, long time. It's given me opportunities to do things that I've always wanted to do. So I've got no hesitation at all about continuing to be a loyal Labour Party member.
Stephen Timms. Well, I think it's disappointing that Russia and China are not represented by their leaders, but I certainly wouldn't say we should write the whole thing off for that reason. I think we have to wait and see where they get to. There have been some worthwhile agreements already, but we do have to get a lot more out of this, I think, if we are to feel pleased with the outcome, and let's see what happens over the next 10 days.
Because Ed Miliband, Labour's Shadow Business Secretary, of course, he was very involved in the previous COP. He, I thought, was remarkably positive in some of the remarks that he's made, particularly about India. Because when I first heard about this, I think it was on the BBC. It was a quite negative report saying, "Oh, well, they've only said 2070," but Ed Miliband actually pointed out, well, that is actually quite something for India to make any commitment like this.
Yeah. No, Ed has had a lot of experience of these matters, and let's see where they reach over the 10 days ahead. I must say I haven't had much of a sense that we've got a plan for where this should all end up by the end of the next 10 days. I hope that we do, but let's wait and see.
Well, just on that, we've got a text from Scott in West London. He says, how confident are the panel that any COP26 agreements reached will be kept, given that politicians and governments come and go, and also the issue that these agreements aren't legally binding? That is an interesting point, isn't it? Because this agreement on methane today, which on the face of it seems quite significant, Ash, but it's a voluntary agreement.
Well, I think one of the things to bear in mind is that pretty much every model shows that pursuing decarbonisation is in fact cheaper than trying mitigation and adaptation down the line. The reality is that we're going to have to do a combination of both, but the fact is that pursuing these solutions now is much cheaper. So there is an incentive for countries to get on net zero as quickly as possible. Even India, which has chosen a relatively late date for net zero 2070, they do have an incentive because there are some models which suggest that over half of Indians will be living under temperatures too hot for human habitation by that point. So there are other pressures on these governments. The other thing is looking at the economics of some of this technology. Solar, hydro, these things are only going to get cheaper. Whereas the same isn't true of fossil fuels. I think there is also a role for nuclear, but unlike these other technologies, nuclear doesn't seem to just get cheaper and cheaper. So I think that there are some incentives here. It might have to be backed up with putting climate at the heart of trade negotiations, perhaps even having sanctions for, bad faith climate vandals who are out there. But I think that it's something to be positive about rather than defeatist.
Stephen, from a governmental point of view, you've been a minister. How do you make sure that countries do keep to the pledges that they're making at these types of conferences?
Well,
Thank you so much for that again. And I just want to ask you another question, which is, what are the greatest challenges you think Christians face in the world of contemporary politics?
I think a big challenge for me is the long hours. I mean, it's a rather kind of crude thing, but, the days start early, they often go on late. There are lots and lots of demands and things that need doing and people wanting attention perfectly, properly, and just coping with those demands, I think, is the biggest challenge. I mean, I don't think that's different for me as a Christian than it is for anybody else. I think I am somebody who wants to respond to those demands. I'm not happy to kind of ignore them or give my constituents a kind of cold shoulder. I do want to be responsive to everybody, and that is pretty demanding. And I suppose that probably is the biggest demand, the biggest challenge that I would say that I face in my work.
Thank you so much for that. And one thing that I admire about you is your courage throughout your career, because unfortunately you were the victim of a knife attack. But you did a very bold interview with the BBC where you said that you wanted to meet your jailed attacker. What were the motivations behind that? And I also just want to ask you, just following on from that, how can other Christians be inspired by your courage in this area? How can other Christians be inspired?
Well, whether people will be inspired, I don't know. That's kind of a matter for them, I think, rather than for me. But I mean, what happened? I wanted to meet my attacker not long after the attack. There was a trial. She was sentenced. I indicated then that I'd like to meet her, just to kind of perhaps partly to understand what that had been about and why. And also, I think as a Christian, people asked me quite a lot at that stage whether I'd forgiven her. And I thought about it, and I felt, well, how can I forgive her if I'm got no communication with her. I think for there to be forgiveness, I think there has to be some relationship. Otherwise, I'm not sure what it means to forgive somebody if you've never spoken to them. So I said at that stage, I'd like to have the chance to meet her. And the police, it was then, said, sorry, they didn't think that was a good idea. So I didn't pursue it. But then a couple of years ago, the police asked to come and talk to me, and they brought with them 3 letters that my attacker had written to me, which I didn't know about their existence before then. And in one of those letters, she clearly did say sorry about what had happened. So that, I think, did open up an opportunity to have a dialogue and, to meet. I mean, it hasn't happened yet, partly because of the pandemic, because getting in and out of prison wasn't allowed for a while. I think perhaps other reasons as well. The authorities haven't taken it forward. I hope they will, and I hope there will be an opportunity for me and my wife together to meet my attacker, and let's see what happens.
Thank you so much for that. And it was really powerful, your thoughts on forgiveness. So thank you so much for sharing that with all of us. Following on from that, you and your wife, Ling Ling, have been married for 35 years. What advice can you give to couples that are still trying to have a longevity in terms of their relationship, despite the challenges posed by the pandemic?
Well, I'm not sure the pandemic makes a great deal of difference, except in our case, perhaps we were together rather more during the pandemic because we were both locked down at home. I mean, normally we're both out and about, and our times together are rather limited. So the pandemic was a bit better in that respect. But I think the thing I think, which I don't know what Ling would say, that's my wife, Ling, who's Singaporean. I don't know what her answer to the question would be, but I think probably our shared commitment to our church is the thing that we have always been together on. We're in church pretty much every Sunday. We are leaders of our church, the two of us, and that's quite a big commitment. And it's something that that we both worked together on, and it's very important for both of us. And with all the things that we're both doing, that's the one thing I think which has kept us together, close together in that period. That's probably the answer, I think.
Thank you so much, Baben, how you draw upon finding common things that you both enjoy doing. And following on from that, what are your hobbies? What do you enjoy doing outside of politics?
Well, I don't get much time outside of politics. When there is time, I enjoy walking. Ling and I go walking a bit, not very often, but when we get the chance, we do. I also enjoy cycling. I sometimes cycle into Westminster. It takes about an hour to cycle into Westminster and an hour back again. I'm pretty shattered after that, but I quite enjoy doing it. We've got my brother and sister around. My mum is as well. So this family time is quite important too.
Thank you. And you have served in many frontbench positions, including Chief Secretary to the Treasury under Tony Blair. What are 3 of the great lessons you've learned over the course of your career?
3 lessons. Well, goodness me. And I'm obviously talking about my work as a member of Parliament. I think one lesson would be the importance of listening to people. I think sometimes as politicians, we think we've got the answers and we should go around kind of telling people what the answers are. I think it's really important, however, to listen properly to constituents and to other people that we work with if we're going to get the answers right. So that would be one lesson. I think another lesson would be the importance of having good Christian support. So for me, as a Christian, there's a group that I meet with every Sunday morning. Just the three of us at the moment. Sometimes it's four, occasionally five, but it's never been more than that. And we meet to talk about what I've been doing, and we pray together. That's been a really important place for me to share and get support. And perhaps I'd add to that, actually, the importance of my church attendance. I've always had huge support from the church that I'm a member of. So that would be the second lesson, I think, that support. And then a third lesson would be the importance of just having friends around to work with. Often just a handful of people that I'm working with in my political work in the Labour Party, who I can really trust, and who find they can trust me as well. And we can collaborate and make things happen in a way that it's much harder if you're doing it on your own. So I think that would be the third lesson.
Here I am today in Parliament, and this is an interview with Stephen Timms, MP, and also Shadow Minister for Employment. Stephen, it's a great pleasure to have you on this special programmes we're doing for the European elections. As a leading Christian here in the British Parliament, what are some of the challenges and difficulties you face being a Christian?
I think for all of us who are Christians in Parliament, it's our faith that shapes everything that we do, the way we think about the problems that we're grappling with. It's what motivates and inspires us. So I would really point to the motivation that comes from faith more than challenges. I think, of course, all of us face challenges, but I think what's really important is putting what we believe into practice in our political work, and that's what I and many of my colleagues are seeking to do.
You are currently the Shadow Minister for Employment under the leadership of Ed Millband. How has the Labour Party changed under his leadership in comparison to Gordon Brown, who was Prime Minister, and you also served as a Minister of State?
Yes, I was a minister under Tony Blair, including a period in the cabinet under Tony Blair and under Gordon Brown as well. I think what's really changed is the economic backdrop. We've seen the huge economic crisis, probably the worst since the 1930s, arguably worse than that in some respects. And that has dramatically changed the political landscape, and it's changed our party's responses and our party's programme as a result. We're in the middle of a very serious cost of living crisis now. People have got worse off since 2010. And so addressing that, changing things for the better for very large numbers of people who are really struggling to make ends meet now, that's at the heart of our party's programme. And of course, that's very different to the sort of concerns we were grappling with 10 or 15 years ago.
Thank you so much, man. Even drawing again on the Christians that you meet up with. You were the chair of Christians on the Left for many years, and you're still a member today. So please tell us about the aims of the group, its purpose, and ultimately the change it's made within the nation.
Yeah, well, Christians on the Left, which used to be called the Christian Socialist Movement, was set up about 60 years ago, getting on for 60 years ago. And it is a movement for people who are Christians and who identify with the left of politics, who want to see a priority on tackling poverty above all, and identify with the Labour movement as a vehicle for bringing about the changes that we need. To some extent, it operates as well as a kind of Christian union within the Labour Party. It's a lively organisation. It's not a huge organisation. We've got, a couple of thousand members, but it's an important organisation. I think it's affiliated to the Labour Party, which means it can send delegates to the Labour Party conference. There are local groups around the country, and it reflects what I feel is very important about our politics, that the Christian faith is a really good starting point for bringing about political change.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. That was brilliant. And one thing that I've also admired about your career is how you've consistently fought for the vulnerable, marginalized communities. And I just want to ask, what are the core values that have driven your career as the MP for East Ham?
Well, I'm a Christian, so my aim is to take my core values from the Bible. And there are very clear values in the Bible about responsibility, solidarity, compassion, patience, persistence, truthfulness. And those are the values that I aim to, those are the values that I believe in. Those are the values that I've experienced as well as a Christian believer. And so those are the values that I aim to reflect in my work, with no doubt varying degrees of success. But that's where those core values come from.
Thank you. And the last question that I'd like to ask you is, as an MP, your life is often scrutinised by the media. How do you handle media attention while protecting your mental health and well-being? Because it must not be easy, you're constantly out there on the front line trying to make a difference, but there's always maybe some type of press that tries to get one up over you, or,
Yeah. Sometimes you have to say no. There are lots of people who want interviews, and you can always say no. There's no obligation to do those things, and it is necessary sometimes to say no from a kind of mental health point of view, I think, just from the point of view of having a rest. I haven't had too many problems with journalists trying to catch me out, a little bit of that. But, it's just a question of kind of being sensible, being on the alert, and not walking into obvious traps, which there are some around. Keep on the alert, keep your eyes open, and it's manageable.
Thank you so much for such a great interview, Stephen. It's always a pleasure to interview.
Thank you, Micah, for having me once again, and nice to see you.